I'll try.
Madam City Clerk.
Technical difficulties. Is it going?
The mic's on.
Okay.
To record.
Yep.
Chairman, I'd ask you to start over again for our report. Announce the public hearing if you can.
Once again, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Annex Planning and Zoning meeting Thursday, October 1st, 2020, here at the new City Annex building. We'd like to start our meeting tonight with our first public hearing, which is the only one tonight. It's 405.195 Retail Overlay District ADM-109. Mr. Graville.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Thank you for being here tonight. On behalf of the city, we have a proposed overlay district along Highway 70. Essentially, this is a retail corridor design overlay district. And as you all are aware, an overlay district doesn't fundamentally change in the underlying zoning. It just allows for enhancements or decreasing of requirements in certain areas to promote certain growth. This is part of the comprehensive plan and part of the design of the overpass. We are bringing forward to you the overlay district, which is the retail corridor overlay district. Now, this district will be, if you guys remember, we brought, when we did the comprehensive plan and the amendment to the comprehensive plan, and we also did the zoning for the areas surrounding the new overpass and also where the outlet mall is. Essentially, they're commercial retail zonings. And what this does is for every development along Highway 70 that is within 100 feet of the highway on a contiguous property, piece of property that touches the right-of-way for Highway 70, this will impose on those properties when development or redevelopment happens a 50% retail on the property or in the property. And the idea behind this, and this was something discussed in the Board of Aldermen's planning session going way back before the overpass was even really conceptualized, is really that is our retail draw area. That's where we want to encourage retail growth. And the idea being that with the 50% requirement, it will allow for some businesses to have maybe a front part that is a retail area and a back part that's a self-storage or something like that. So on parcels of property they're developing now, we're getting not only consistent with what's going to go out there, who's going to pay the money for that ground, but we're getting that retail along that Interstate 70 corridor that we're hoping to grow to. So I'm here to answer any questions on behalf of the city and really to respond to any concerns that the Planning and Zoning Commission may have. With that, I will only ask one more thing, that the city code of the city of Warrenton be made a part of the record by reference, that the public hearing notice for this public hearing be made a part of the record by reference. That's that. I have nothing else on behalf of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Graville. Anyone here tonight to speak on behalf of the public hearing 405.195 Retail Overlay District? In favor or against it? Hearing none, we'll close our public hearings for this evening and open up our regular meeting. If anyone does want to speak tonight, make sure that we come to the podium, introduce yourself, and speak loudly. So tonight we have our minutes from August 6, 2020 P&Z meeting first. We'll take those and entertain a motion.
I move to accept the minutes as read.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Cooper, second by Mr. Cullum, to approve the minutes as submitted. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Costello is absent. Mr. Deach?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Cullum?
Yes.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Priest is absent. Mr. Holt?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor is absent, and we have one vacancy.
Okay. Motion passes 6-0 with 3 absent and 1 vacant. Thank you. Next. Next is the 405.195 Retail Overlay District, ADM-109, which Mr. Rubio just discussed with us. So we'll take any questions from the commissioners tonight. Or any conversation about that. I know it's one thing that you want to make sure that when these developers come in and they do provide information to the city, that they have a requirement that is posted on their plat, that there's 50%.
Their zoning requirement when they redevelop for commercial use will require at least 50% to be retail.
Are there existing businesses that are not doing that?
No existing businesses, well, whether or not they are or they aren't, it doesn't matter. This is a new requirement, so they would be grandfathered in. So if they had I'm trying to think, some type of industrial use, for example, that industrial use would continue and they would continue to utilize that industrial use. And now if they sold the property and somebody bought it for a different use, they would have that 50% requirement. And there are mechanisms within our code that we can work with the developer if there's an exceptional development to come in and it may not be retail that we can direct them to, and that's kind of part of the, and this is consistent with the comprehensive plan that we did a couple of years ago about really, that is, as much as Highway 70 defines the city of Warrenton, that really is our retail corridor for the city, our larger, retail style corridor where they would go. So that's what our planner said, and that this is really following through once we got the roundabouts built in that area.
So when does that grandfather end? Does it end for transfer of ownership or transfer by sale?
So that's a great question. So grandfather really has, legal non-conforming uses really have no bearing whatsoever on when ownership changes. What it is based on is whether or not they continue to use it in the same or substantially similar manner, or whether they've abandoned the use. Now, abandoned is one of those words that the court has defined over and over in different senses because it's ambiguous, as the court would most likely choose. I will tell you, we have always had a very strong administrative process in place to recognize grandfathered uses, whether they're farming, prior uses are inconsistent with the code, and we have always, as a city, favored the grandfathered use, even where there's a question of abandonment in particular situations. Obviously, Commissioner Holt, we would take that up on a case-by-case basis, and if they were denied a grandfathered use, they would have the right to appeal it to the Board of Adjustment to consider whether or not they're allowed to use that. So there is due process in place and whatnot. Really what this is directed is for new developments coming in as a retail use, or really substantially dedicating 50% of their use to a retail use.
Thanks. Any questions or comments? Entertain a motion?
I'd like to place a motion for approval of a request for an update as per ADM 109.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Cullum, second by Mr. Holt, to approve the 405.195 Retail Overlay District ADM-109. Any further questions, comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Cullen,
Yes.
Mr. Barton,
Yes.
Mr. Dermott,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Holt,
Yes.
Mr. Deitch.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. Next order of business will be Hawthorne Hollow Preliminary Plat Subdivision -80.
So Bart Corman from Lewis and Beatty has both subdivision plats.
Okay.
This is the preliminary plat for the development of a 9.7 acre area of land. It's 8 single family lots. The preliminary plat drawing that has been submitted to the city complies with our code. Because it complies with our code, we have to approve the preliminary plat. But Mr. Corman's here to answer any questions and to take any suggestions that may be considered for the final plat. Mr. Corman, when do you anticipate you're going to have the final plat?
It'd be probably here in a couple of months because we've got some construction to do. We have construction plans to do before, just to make sure, and then we can do a final plat. So probably 2 3 months. Then once, next week. Next week. But yeah.
And then the only other thing, I know there's some members of the public here, so I would ask Chairman if they desire to provide any comment to the planning and zoning commissioners on it, that we recognize them, they state their name
Yep.
and their address, and then also we will allot them 5 minutes to speak, and the city clerk will time that when that time begins.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Bart Corman, Lewis and Beatty Silver Engineers. Present to you today, Hawthorne Hollow preliminary plat. We have Ben Beckmeyer with Ben Beckmeyer Construction here, owner, and to answer any questions that I can't maybe. But like Mr. Breville talked about, it's 8 single-family lots. It's basically off of Hawthorne Hills Drive. We're just taking the lots off of that. The street's already there. And then we're leaving an outlot there between it and Walmart, just because it's very difficult to pretty much develop for anything at this point in time with the economics of it. So we are proposing a stormwater detention pond in the gully that cuts in through there. But for record, it's basically just straight north of Walmart is where it's at for everybody listening out there. Pretty simple. We're just doing roughly 79-foot lots through there with about a 10,000-11,000 square foot average or so. About as simple as that. I'll answer any questions anybody has.
Detention pond, is that a requirement? I mean, that's a fairly steep hill. I mean, it was a watershed. It's a watershed now, so I don't know.
Yeah. So the city requires stormwater detention, except for there's a few cases where we could do into the stormwater fund instead of doing that. This one, that fund would be pretty expensive to do for this, and would probably be at a fairly large threshold with 8 lots. And so we have that valley there, and the best thing to do is utilize that valley for the detention. But yes, is it steep? Yes. And that's why this thing hasn't been developed till now. I mean, if you think about it, this could have been developed 30 years ago almost, but it hadn't, because it's not the most ideal piece of property, but it will have some nice walkouts for it. We're probably going to kick a few homeless people out of the woods when we do all this, but there's a little camp back in there at one time, probably still there today, but we're going to try to clean that up and expand what Hawthorne is there and utilize it that way.
So because the detention pond's built on a grade, I'm assuming it's going to be a pretty steep dam on the southwest side. Can you speak to who's going to be monitoring the risk of that dam moving forward?
Sure. So the Subdivision Association will end up owning that dam. We'll do a 3-to-1 back slope for sure. So that's kind of the standard engineering practice with soils around here. If you're a 3-to-1, you're stable. If you start getting into 2.5-to-1, it's a little iffy and it's harder to maintain. And 2-to-1 you can do for most clays. However, it's very hard to maintain. And on a dam, you want to make sure that it's maintained so you don't have trees and brush grow on it as well and create that problem. So that ultimately the homeowners association will be required for the maintenance of that. Not the city. The city doesn't like to maintain stormwater basins for subdivisions, so the homeowners association usually ends up with that responsibility.
Is there any way to enforce that? Because I'm just curious, because if they do let vegetation grow in that dam, it's a significant breach risk. So I don't know. And that's, of course, you're looking at Walmart, the building and the parking lot is to the south. So.
Right. Yeah. So many towns, and Warrenton, I'm sure, has probably sent some letters to some associations at times when they need to maintain it, when they got cattails growing or willows growing in it, stuff like that. But that's usually what happens is send in a letter and make them aware of it. When the developer is still in control, is sometimes when I get a call and I hear about it. But usually that's usually the case that happens. In the case of a defunct homeowners association, your attorney could probably provide you some more insight, but I've had one town discuss that they would have the authority to go in there. The city could go in and clean it up if nobody took responsibility, and then file a lien on all the houses that were within that subdivision. So there are some other mechanisms. They're not pretty, they're not fun. If everybody could take care of the property, it'd be great. But there are some circumstances out there in my experience that I've heard about that do have other ways and other recourses to make sure there's some maintenance done.
Yeah, and if I could speak to that, Commissioner Holt, because I've been involved in stormwater enforcement, really. No, the city does not, well, I want to make sure it's clear. The city does not take the stormwater over, okay? It is a responsibility of the property owner. It's a responsibility of the subdivision association. And ultimately, if the subdivision association is defunct, it's the responsibility of the homeowners there. We've had issues with other stormwater detention basins. Spring Business Park is one that jumps to mind. I think, Bart, you were involved in that, where there was a siltation overflow because there was overgrowth there, that we then enforced that, essentially not. This detention basin will be a zoning requirement and a plat requirement. If they do not maintain it, we do enforce those against the subdivision association, and if not the subdivision association, then against the individual lot owners. It's never pretty because typically the phone call comes in and people say, the city's dam is not being maintained, and we then look at it and research and go back and say, well, it's not our dam. You all own this as tenants in common, or the subdivision association does it, and then we work with them to get it into a maintainable condition or whatnot. So I think it's a great point. I think making sure that this is built correctly so it has a 30 to 40 year minimum lifespan with regular maintenance, and we will, it's on a complaint basis. We do not go out and inspect or anything like this. I would imagine this dam is not big enough where it's regulated by the state. But we will, if we get complaints about it, overgrowth, stagnant water, and or just the general condition or maintenance of it, we do, code enforcement does act on that. We do write them citations, do notices. If it becomes a health and safety issue, we do have the ability to take it through the nuisance process where the city can pay the money to go fix it, and then we put it on liens on either that property or the individual parcel owner's property, depending on how it's titled or deeded.
Okay, appreciate it, thanks.
And has the homeowners association been notified of this? In other words, have their officers been apprised of the dam and their responsibility?
So that's a good question, especially for all those that live in Hawthorne Hills. This is Hawthorne Hollow, so it will not be part of that association unless you're working something out with them. It will have its own association with those 8 lot owners.
Right.
So it won't have anything officially associated with the other association that does have some power.
Which leads to the next question. Does he have plans on making sure that the new people that are coming into this subdivision will be aware of that, part of their paperwork at the closing or whatever?
It'll be, assuming he does indentures and covenants, it'll be part of the title work. They'll have to acknowledge that as part of the purchase of the property and whatnot.
Because I know sometimes that, even in situations that we've had in the past in my own personal life, that sometimes those slips through somebody will buy a house and say, well, no one gave us that at closing or whatever. So it's just important that make sure that gets, for a homeowner to know that.
Right.
Even though we hope that we never have it.
Usually it's on your title commitment. It's a one-liner, says, see those covenants, and nobody actually goes and looks up those covenants and sees it. But
Okay. And at closing, they sign about 75 times and they're ready to go home. So,
Yeah, exactly. And usually the HOA form is one of them.
Right.
It should have a stipulation.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Corman, I would imagine you guys haven't written the homeowners association documents yet.
No.
So I think it would be good in going to the Board of Aldermen and following up to Commissioner Holt's question as an FYI to have an understanding of what those assessments are going to be on the lots and kind of what the long-term plan, what, a projection of what maintenance is going to require, what kind of maintenance. I don't know anything about dams. Is it going to be $100 a year assessment? Because I think that question could come up to kind of figure out what that long-term maintenance, problems that could be expenses that could arise and how you plan to meet that out among the individual 8 lots. Because I would imagine if that fails, it's gonna be pretty expensive for those 8 lots. So I would imagine you'd want to build that maintenance over an annual basis for major repairs if necessary. That'd be helpful.
It's a few other things just to make sure, sidewalk on the western property line from the western property line to Terminal's Court. There's a sidewalk that's been started there. I know.
Yes.
We'd like for that to be continued and finished there. Is that
Correct, yeah. So our second revision added that sidewalk on this side of Hawthorne Hills Drive. From the city comments, we've added that. So the original one did not, so there's sidewalk on the other side, but on the second revision, we added that for the request of the city staff.
you saw the rest of the cluster mailbox comment?
Sure, yes.
Talk about that.
And so we added a note on the cluster mailboxes. Note number 13, mailboxes shall be located on each individual lot upon separate approval from the United States Postal Service. If individual mailboxes are not approved, then a CMU or central mail unit will be placed on either Outlot A or Common Ground. So we know that we got to work with the Postal Service since it's already an existing route, existing lots there. Ben's had some conversations with Postal Service and is confident that he'll be able to do that with individual mailboxes. But if not, we know that it is the developer's responsibility to put that in there, and that's how we worded note 13 to take care of that if it has to come to that. So nobody will be in limbo next year or two saying, what's up with the post office situation. So.
And they talked about paying into the park fund.
So, yeah, so whenever the park fees are calculated, that'll have to be done before the final plat,
And completion of the escrow required, right? As usual.
as usual.
That's about all the comments that you had. Anybody else have any comments or questions for Mr. Cormier?
Yeah, I was curious as when it comes to the dam, how steep is that actually? I cut occasionally, I'll cut
Sure.
the dam and the places around. And there are some that are really too steep for cutting. I just wondered what kind of angle is this one going to be?
Sure. So right now we got it laid out as a 3-to-1 slope. So 1 foot rise for 3 foot of length. Okay.
Okay.
Which is classified as maintainable. It's not necessarily completely comfortable, but it's maintainable. If you look at the slope just east of that dam, that slope grade there is actually steeper than a 3-to-1.
Okay.
So it's a little steeper right there. And so that's why you see our dam's up a little bit, and you can see that how the toe comes further south than even that bank there. So if you want to look at that bank, it's going to be less steep than that by just a
Okay,
little bit.
because I know that's a concern. I said I've got one I'm dealing with now, and they're going to have to redo it because of the fact that it's part of it's too steep and part of it's because it wasn't maintained well enough. So
Yeah, that happens a lot throughout the area.
Any other questions or comments from the commission or anybody from the audience?
Turn it over to the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Anyone on the audience speak? Entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion we accept it.
Second. With all the city recommendations.
Yes.
Seconded. We have a motion by Mr. Durbin, second by Mr. Cooper, to approve Hawthorne Hollow preliminary plat subdivision -A with all the city recommendations that were mentioned by Mr. Corwin. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Holt?
Yes.
Mr. Deep?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Barton?
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. 3 absent and 1 vacancy. Thank you for that. Next order of business will be the Meadows at Walnut Hollow, Plat 4, preliminary plat, subdivision -81.
Planning and Zoning Commission, once again, Chris Gravel with the City of Warrenton. This is a preliminary plat, once again, 31.2 acres along Walnut Creek Road. Preliminary plat depicts 76 single-family residential lots. And the lot size is a minimum frontage requirement, meets or exceeds the current R2 single-family residential zoning district. As you can see by the short comment letter, it meets the code requirements for preliminary plats. And, just a note about the streetlights are included and located in accordance with the city's municipal code. And prior to the approval of the final plat, a completion escrow will be required. So on the city's behalf, the city is recommending approval of the preliminary plat, and Mr. Coleman is here to discuss or answer any questions about it.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Corman?
Sure. And for the record again, Bart Corman, Lewis and Beatty Storage Engineers. Most likely on Zoom is the Heath family with Hickory Ridge Family LLC. So if we want to kind of go back in history a little bit without getting too long and lengthy, because I told you I'd try to make it short tonight. Back in '04, Meadows at Walnut Hollow went through the first process and had a full layout of this entire property. Obviously, it's changed hands a few times and stuff, and so the first 3 plats on the south have been platted and are constructed now. Through this layout, the original layout, the lots were a little short. They didn't meet the 120-foot requirement, and so continuing on further north with that same layout was going to be difficult, as well as off-site sewer was all planned to go off-site and gravity sewer to the north and west. And so with those hindrances, as well as having small lots and making it tough for some of the newer housing models that have some depth to them to fit in there, we restructured this layout for Plat 4 to go through that a little different. So we got roughly 79-foot lots on most of them. 70 foot's the minimum, and there's a couple of them that are 70s. A lot of them are 130 foot deep. So you're looking at a lot of them are 10,000 square foot and larger lots. What we did was we're going to grade this thing so that the gravity sewer can come over the hump and do that. And so when we did the sewer in Plat 3, we laid that extra deep so we could do this to eliminate a pump station or that offsite sewer. But we had to lose some lots to do it. So the previous version was going to be around 100 lots. We're only at about 76. So there was some lot loss there, but there was some trade-offs on some cost savings too. But then there's additional grading to make that all work. There are a few lots that won't gravity sewer that will have to deal with common force main, just because they're just a little bit too far down the hill. We've worked with Public Works on that, and have a stormwater basin up in the northwest corner. So the same questions applied on the previous plat. Maintenance via the homeowner association, because it'd be common ground. Could be a 3-to-1 back slope on that as well. I could talk a whole bunch more, but I'll just answer any questions anybody may have.
Again, is this, when you talk about the homeowners association area, is that just for this plat, or is it for all the previous people that own there now?
This one should be eligible for staying in the homeowner association, all of it. Okay, because the original homeowner association included this full development.
Right.
So this is just a reconfiguration of that development. So it should be able to be included. I'm assuming that's the case. If my client's available and can speak, they can probably talk more about that. But I believe they will be able to be in it. They may take the option of not being in it as well, but most likely it will be in the existing homeowner association.
What was the option of not being in it work?
How does the option of not being in it?
You're talking about
The homeowners association.
Mr. Heath not,
Yeah, Mr. Heath.
not the homeowners out.
Right. So Mr. Heath could probably develop this without being in the homeowners association, but he would have to have a lawyer and probably make sure of that and make sure that there's some clarification with the homeowners association that's in existence now. They wouldn't be of some sort, but that's a legal question that's beyond me.
And again, the light issue that Mr. Rivera talked about is,
Yeah, the streetlights. Yeah, they were in compliance, right?
Yeah, they were in compliance.
Yeah, they were in compliance on the distance between them.
and
We-
special part fund, again, like the previous one, the escrow and so forth.
Right, yeah. They'll have to be paid prior to the final plat.
And I think one of the things, the question, since, we're doing meetings the way we're doing it, and Mr. Heath's not here, is we can get that answer before. I'm sure Bart can get the answer about their intention of, it's less of a concern when it's 72 homes. It's more of a concern when it's 8 homes.
Right.
If it's gonna be a separate subdivision association. I would be surprised because, this development was, they did 1/4 of it, Bart, originally. And then the bank took it over and then put the road in, and then George Heath did the second part. Actually, it may have been like 1/5 of it originally. It wasn't a large part. It was an enormous, how many houses did Meadows and Walnut House originally have?
Originally, the whole development was gonna have a little over 200 and like 225, and this will be about 200.
And this is the last piece of it.
And this is the last.
I would be surprised if the homeowners association didn't have some reservation based on square feet of, or miles of ownership that Mr. Heath still controls it, where he can basically put it in there, but we'll get the answer before the next meeting, before this goes in front of the board.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else have any questions or anyone in the audience here to speak tonight? Just one opportunity for anyone to speak if they need to. State the name of your address.
Katie Stewart, and then the 29510 Walnut Hollow Drive. So we're about 2 houses down from where the road will extend into the new area. And so my question is about the roads. And is there going to be another entrance into that 4th plat, or are we going to use the existing roads? Because as it is right now on Walnut Hollow, we have a lot of traffic. And if we're adding 76 more houses, I'm concerned about the amount of traffic, especially for my 4 children.
Good question. We'll let them come back up and talk.
Okay.
Sure. So to address the citizen's question there, we will have the 2 stubs, one basically headed towards the north across the pipeline, and one to the west. We maintain those stubs very in similar fashion as the approved in 04 preliminary plat with a stub right there and a stub up here. So we do that, and as well as if you remember, Walnut Hollow back in 04, they put 2 entrances in onto Highway AA. So if the Dyer tract is purchased and developed, that'll probably have a connection up to Willow Road and connect up through here, so there would be additional, as well as if the Palish and Shaw Harvey, Shaw, I think, some of those owners to the west, if they would develop, that would tie in and have an entrance on AA as well. So it was laid out to interconnect north and to the west. We did not do any interconnection then or now to the east because those are large lots already developed and outside the city limits.
So the answer to her question is you're not planning on an additional entryway at this point in time.
No, because there's no other public access. So we're meeting the same plans that was before, but we are doing less lots. So there will be less traffic than if we would have continued with the original plan. So,
If this development goes through, then this lady will see more traffic on her streets.
yes.
Anyone else like to speak tonight?
I'll speak.
Thanks, sir. Step to the podium.
My name is Adam Kitchen. I live at 29493 Walnut Grove Lane. I'm actually a member of the trustees of the Homeowners Association.
Thanks for being here.
I like the idea of this. I do have a concern with the traffic and whatnot. With the 30-something additional houses that George just developed, we've had traffic issues, speeders. We've gotten with the city and, you know, they've increased patrols and stuff like that. So that's kind of curbed it, but I mean, you're ultimately going to have that inevitably. Adding 76 more houses. I do like the fact that it is replatted for, you know, less houses rather than 100 something, 76 something, or whatever it may be. The concern really that I have was kind of the option to elect to not be in the homeowners association. I mean, it's one thing to have the increased traffic with it being part of the homeowners association, because ultimately they have some sort of responsibility. But if they ultimately have the option to not, well, that's really, really disconcerting with me. I don't like that one bit at all. And I'm sure the existing 7 or 30 houses that are there now would be in opposition to that as well. I do like the addition of the common ground on the, I guess it's the northwest corner. There's not much common ground right there. With that retention pond, I'm not sure how the elevation of that would be for the common ground. You know, whether it be higher or I would imagine it'd be lower. You know, but I would just like to see, you know, it be continued part of the subdivision or of the homeowners association if that was, you know, that's really the only concern I've got.
So I do have a question for you. So the 30-something houses that Mr. Heath did that he added, is that part of the subdivision association?
Okay, so there's been some confusion with that. Apparently, these homes got sold. The people that bought them, I don't know if they were told that they were part of the homeowners association. I've never done this before. I kind of, you know, once it got defunct and whatnot, we were sending money to a management company and nobody knew where anything was going. Nobody knew where any money was going, where it was spent. So I kind of stepped in, assumed the role, you know, got voted in, got it, whatever. So now we're trying to go through the process of adopting these particular houses. There's been a house that was sold, I think the first house was sold in 2019. They're still not part of the homeowners association. So now they're gonna get hit with 2 years of back assessments, which that shouldn't be penalized towards them, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the city does not get into, I mean, the long-term maintenance is a legitimate question of the, you know, because the city ultimately doesn't want to be the bad guy that has to come in and tell
Sure.
people the common areas need to have to be maintained, because they're ultimately, as you well know, become the ones responsible, probably the situation you had it. Walnut Hollow was such an unusual development because that first part got built and then the market crashed, the housing market crashed, and these, you know, at one point in time, the city was making a claim in a bank in Clayton for $1 million letter of credit to finish these streets and these roads, and we worked it out with the bank. So it's had a very unusual development history, including at one point in time, I don't know if you lived there, where you guys were paying to plow your own streets because the landowner never turned the streets over to the city and didn't get the streetlights turned on, and we got that worked out. So this has always been an adventure. I didn't know if this final part would ever get finally built and developed. You know, this will go in front of Planning and Zoning Commission. I think this is a legitimate question. I would imagine Mr. Corman will address it. I will tell you, you know, in all our dealings with Mr. Heath, he's been very upfront and honest about, you know, I'm sure you've had that experience as well as, you know, as far as this. So I know he'll take this question seriously and get Mr. Corman an answer so we can address it before the board of aldermen. Because I do think you raised some good questions. Ultimately, the city can't force them to be in or tell them they have to set up their own. I think it makes sense, and I think the rationale makes sense. But, you know, I would suggest, you get in touch with Mr. Corman or maybe Mr. Heath and kind of figure out what that is so you don't have that problem. Because as I asked that question, then I thought, oh, this is the one that they weren't part of it, and then they kind of want to be part of it, kind of don't. And so, if we can avoid that process this time, Bart, that'd be great. And I'm sure Mr. Heath would love to avoid that process as well. Not to speak for him, but he's always been genuinely interested in making sure that those issues don't come up.
And I think that's, at least that's something, at least they could be comfortable in knowing that this is a local guy, not somebody that's coming from outside.
Right.
With that, so he wants what's best in so it's a great family, so I'm hoping that it all gets worked out in the way that's for everyone.
But that's the only concern.
Well, thank you for your time, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Anybody else? Make sure everyone has a chance to speak. Yes, sir, come on.
I've never been to one of these meetings.
You're fine. Just take your name and your address if you don't mind, sir.
Okay, my name is Steve Rupnick, 31 Primrose Court.
Okay.
This is involved with the, was it Hawthorne Hollow?
Okay, that's fine.
The question I have is that, can maybe Bart or somebody explain what the C4 plan commercial means?
That's the lot you have left over?
Pretty much. Basically, the line's not perfect there, but basically, yeah. So basically,
Why don't you step up, Bart? Can you pull up Hawthorne? I know we're getting off topic here, but
That's fine.
I think this is a good question because we didn't really address it when we discussed it. Even though this has already been approved, let's have Bart address it.
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up now. I wasn't familiar with the format.
No, you're all good. That's why we're going to address it now.
That's why I wanted to put it
It's
in.
perfect time to bring it up.
I didn't know if you wanted to finish one.
Well, let's go. Why don't you, I know it's a little confusing, but
You're fine. Go ahead.
let's
Okay.
address it on it.
We're pretty flexible.
Yes.
All right, so on Hawthorne Hollow, our city zoning map, somewhere right along here, has that as residential, and this is the C4, okay? C4 is really only the Walmart complex area in town, if I'm not mistaken, the C4. And C4 basically says if it's an approved use anywhere in town, you can do it in C4. Which is a very unique zoning, and that's why it's extremely limited to that area. But the residential lots are basically going to be in a residential area. That line may not be exactly perfect to what we got here, but it will be significant enough that you're not going to be able to set up a store in the backyard of lot 3 or something like that to do that, because it's basically at least 90% of the lot's going to be residential. And that can probably be cleaned up in the next comprehensive plan because you'd have an actual legal description of each lot if you needed to, if there was a concern, but I really don't think there's going to be concern, especially with some common ground even in the C4. So that's what it is, but yes, so this area here is C4, and this area here is residential per the existing zoning map.
Yeah, we do occasionally have these kind of split zoning lots. I will tell you in my experience doing zoning law for 20 years, if your lot is 90% residential, you're not going to be able to do a C4 commercial use on that 10%. It's incapable of doing it. And occasionally the lines are inexact where the line doesn't directly follow where the plat line is. I don't know if that answers your question, but you're welcome to ask for clarification from the city or from Mr. Corman if you need.
Well, just put it on the record because I think other homeowners would like to know the proximity of the residential versus the C4. That's, the map helps out a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, it's just kind of a quirk in our zoning. This is not a C4 zoning district, it's a residential use, although it may have a portion of the lot with the C4 zoning district. It's a residential development, but it is close to the C4. It does walk up to the boundary of the C4, but I think that's a great point, because people buying those properties may want to know that they're that close to C4.
Does that influence price of the lots?
Well, I think you'd have to ask Mr. Beckmeyer if that influences the price of the lot. Does that mean you can get more or less for it, man?
Right now, there's no plan to do anything on there anyway, and it's pretty rough ground, as Bart was saying. I mean, the economics that develop in that property would be pretty high. So,
Yeah, and C4, that's the only C4 allowed in the code. And that was part of the development of the Walmart Supercenter.
You can see the orange R2 there. So there's that. So this is basically the subdivision. And so that, general case of the map is somewhere either along about where those lines are that we have, or the center of the building, one or the other, somewhere in there. It's really hard to tell exactly where that line is from the map, but it's, the general intent is the residential lots that we're doing are already in R2 zone.
Thank you for everyone's input. You'll go back to the.
Yeah, if you're ready to go back to Meadows and Walnut Hollow.
Yes, sir.
That'd be good. I did want to add one thing, because I did forget to mention it in my presentation, is this is 76 lots. However, it will not be constructed and platted all at one time.
Okay.
We've got some phases there that are in general that we hope we can stick to those phase lines, but we've asked for flexibility as markets change, constructability. But you're not going to see this all built at one time and platted at one time. It's going to be built in phases due to economics, sales, and the ability to do it. So I'm going to point that out.
But it goes back to the comments that were made in the last month meeting about running out of places to build homes if needed down the road with the market changing and so forth. That at least you had places to build when needed.
Right. Yeah. This will be ready. It'll already be through these meetings. So if he wants to do some additional stuff, we'll get construction permits, and then we'll have a final plat, and we'll just have to run a final plat through the meetings and not have to come back here and take up your guys' time.
And there was a couple of comments about the detention pond.
Yes, the detention pond will sit fairly low from the street. We had to raise the street right there quite a bit to get the gravity sewer to go. And then, but the embankment for the pond will sit quite a bit higher than the ditch to the northwest of there. It's going to be part of the common ground. We'll preserve that area with woods, and so that area is going to stay wooded because there's no point clearing that out. So, but it'll be there. It'll just kind of be, someone wants to hike back there, whatever they could, I guess. So.
It's kind of what I was wondering was, would that be a good place for like a park or some sort, with trails?
It's fairly steep. It starts dropping off pretty good back there. It's pretty steep. So we didn't really have any envision of actually putting any trails in there, but once it's the homeowner association, if they so choose, I guess they could.
Any other questions or comments from the commission? Nothing from the city? Bart, anybody? I'd like to speak still? Hearing none?
Can I get clarification?
Go ahead, yeah, come on back up. State your name just one more time for the record. please.
Okay, I'm Katie Sawyers again.
Sorry.
You know the address.
No, it's not.
Okay. I just want clarification on, are both the roads that are, I guess it's south of the land that's going to be developed, are both of those at that end going to be developed? And also, did you say there is no chance in the future that another entrance will be added? I was unclear of your answer.
Sure.
Clarify.
So the The streets that access this are all through Meadows and Wallen Hollow. So we got two stub streets here, okay? And that's the only accesses to the outside world, basically. So they're all gonna interconnect. We're gonna have a stub right here going to the west and a stub north across the pipeline, okay? So those would be able to interconnect later if those properties develop. But the owners of this property do not own those properties, so have no control over that at this time. So those stubs are consistent with the previous approved plans. But both stub streets here will continue on, just in a little different fashion that was proposed. And then the Walnut Creek Lane interconnector, we'll connect that way.
Those be three different ways to get into that section. Walnut Hollow, Walnut Creek, and that.
Yes, this one just loops around this way, but there's also a stub down here too. So, yeah, but this
That's your street,
this
that's my
will
street.
be the
Okay.
main access points.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sires. Once again, thank you all for being here this evening. Showing interest in the Mr. Corman, thank you.
Thank you.
Back to the commission, anybody have any further questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the claims.
I'll second.
With the stipulation that the gentleman's concerned about the option of HOAs discussed with landowner, Mr. Heath.
You second. Or call it Mr.
Paul.
So we have a motion from Mr. Durbin, and a second from Mr. Cullum, to approve the Meadows at Walnut Hollow Plat 4 preliminary plat subdivision -81 with the notification that we'd like for Mr. Heath to get with Mr. Foreman and the homeowners association to try to clarify that before the next step and make sure everyone's under the understanding of what lies ahead there. Again, good comments and thank you. Any other questions or comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Holt?
Yes.
Mr. Deitch?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. And the Board of Alderman meeting that comes from is what day?
October 20th.
October 20th. Hopefully that comes from the next meeting. And now we'll close the meeting and start it up for Mr. Gurville. Has anybody got anything from the city for us?
Anything you want me to work on? Nothing really for the city, Randy, can you think of?
Ms. Walters?
We have a couple things coming up for the next meeting, so we will be having a meeting in November.
It's November. Okay.
November 5th, I believe.
Mr. Rick Beach?
Mr. Gravel, it's come to my attention that we have a number of individuals in the community who are homeless, for lack of a better term. Some of whom Mr. Corman mentioned in the wooded area behind Walmart. And I know it's not the task of the Planning and Zoning Committee to take that issue up until such time as someone will come before the commission wanting to deal with the facility. But I am concerned, and I would hope that the city would have some plan for providing some assistance to these people as the weather gets cold and nasty. It's fine to sleep outside in warm weather, but winter is on its way. And I'm just, as an individual, voicing my concern for the welfare of those individuals who find themselves homeless in our community.
I think that's a great point, Mr. Deitch. I will say, we've always taken, I think, a very progressive stance towards lower income housing. We've supported 2 of the low income housing projects that are developed, and they're beautiful projects that have come in front of you all. We've also got a good stock of the lower level housing, but I think to your point, it's more of not just a housing issue, but, you know, what are we doing to take care of this population? Building sidewalks so people can get to Walmart because they can't afford cars, one thing, but I know Alderman Ock's here. I know he takes that to heart with his involvement with some of the charitable organizations, and it'll be something we'll take back to the city administrator and let her know that you've expressed that comment. And, you know, look at the programs we currently participate, like the domestic violence shelter that houses a lot of homeless people, you know, looking at what programs we have coming up into the winter, especially in light of the pandemic that we're on, the ongoing pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ruby, you have anything?
Nope.
Anyone else have anything for the good of the group? Entertaining motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second by, who seconded it? Anyone wants to?
Yeah.
So, motion by Mr. Lee, second by Mr. Thomas to adjourn for night. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for coming out. Have a great evening.